Hello and welcome to another Tuesday talkie on the Bearfoot Miniatures channel. Today we're going to be going over the new mechanic and warlord traits and how they interact with corrupted engines and the corrupted engines themselves. So as I said, today we're going to be going over the new mechanic and warlord traits for traitor players and how that intermeshes with the corrupted engines that have previously been in legacy PDFs, as well as now included in this book in some slightly updated ways, but we'll just be going over how they're presented in this book today, rather than like a direct page by page, like, oh, this stat has changed, that stat has changed. Now, if you do want this in podcast format, so just in an audio only stream, that is available to Patreons of the channel, which you can get on a link below, as well as supporting the channel that little bit more, getting yourself dice, access to the Discord and early release videos. And with that, let's just kick off straight into the warlord traits. So the first one is Scion of Cyclothathrate. Cyclothathrate. God, I really hate pronouncing these, especially in they've just prolific throughout the mechanic and books, but however you want to say the first one. Basically, it's haywire protection, specifically for corrupted engines, and that's something that we're going to see throughout this section, is specific benefits for corrupted engines rather than mechanicum units in general. So essentially, you, instead of using a normal haywire table for corrupted engines in an army with this warlord trait, you're instead going to use the haywire dampening table. And long story short of that, it's a 1 to 3 the haywire does nothing instead of the 1 result normally. On a 4 to 5, it's a glancing hit or 1 wound with only invuns or damage mits allowed, and a 6 is the normal 6 where no saves, invulnerable or otherwise, or damage mits are allowed to be taken against the wound, and it's a penetrating hit on vehicles. Now, where your additional reaction comes is in the movement phase, and I'm going to be assuming for all of these that the Aether Tech type is going to be used by your Magos, essentially because that is the prescribed Techno Arcana that benefits basically with its own version of the Cyberthurgy table, in which you get benefits to corrupted engines. So that's one that most benefits your corrupted engines, of which you'll be taking one to utilise this. Now, I don't think this warlord trait is actually that useful. If it gave a much greater degree of protection to those corrupted engines, I think, yes, it's good, but the actual amount of haywire now in the game, outside of, say, Iron Hands armies, Iron Warriors armies in combat, but then again, as traitor versus traitor, I suppose there's a lot of Iron Warriors loyalist players, boo, hiss, but it's going to be fairly infrequent that you run into that much haywire. Now, it can be super annoying when you do run into the haywire and oh my god, there's a gravitat everywhere around every corner. I still don't think this is better than, say, Logic of Victory, which is a standard mechanic and warlord trait that, and actually it's going to be the one that I keep referring back to because it's near the obvious choice for mechanic and players. So what Logic of Victory does is, if your warlord doesn't shoot a weapon, so you can use Cyberthurgy, or in this case Aether Tech style Cyberthurgy to boost your corrupted engines, it gives you a reaction in every phase of the game. So that is very, very useful. It also increases your ballistic skill on reactions, weapon skill on reactions, and movement distances that you're going to move by reacting. Compared to that, getting a very localized effect on your corrupted engines, of which we'll see later, actually the Force Org placements of where your corrupted engines are means that you're going to have some non-corrupted engines to be your mainstay, your line units. I don't think this is a big enough benefit for me to consider it over Logic of Victory. Next, we get a name that I can actually pronounce, and leave it in the comments if I immediately mispronounce this. Sign of Zana 2. Essentially, this Warlord trait grants you an additional advanced reaction. The advanced reaction can be made once per battle in the shooting phase, and it boosts your Malefic Aegis number by 1 to a maximum of 4 until the end of the shooting phase. Your Malefic Aegis score is essentially what you're going to get instead of a automatic deflector. So, taking for example the Brass Scorpion has an inbuilt Aegis, Malefic Aegis of 5 up. This will boost it with a reaction to 4. But your Knight can only react in certain situations. So then we look at the Decimator. Dreadnought, yes, it's a 5 up. Blood Slaughterers, 6 up. You're only getting it from those 2 units because of the Knight effect of the Kytan Engine and the Brass Scorpion. So then we're limited to these 2. Within the actual Aethertech Cybernetica, you can increase this by 1, or Cybernetica, Cyberthergy. You can increase this value by 1 so that you can actually get to that cap of 4 up on Blood Slaughterers, Decimators. You don't actually need it to get to that cap, because even just the +1 will get you to the 4 up, and that comes through the Cyberthergy from Aethertech. So a once per battle thing to essentially utilize for your Warlord trait, I don't actually see as that incredibly good, especially with the only real benefit I see of it is massively on Blood Slaughterers, because then it reaches a 4 up from starting at a 6 up by stacking it also with the Augurtech Cyberthergy. And I keep calling it Cyberthergy, but it's Animatus Malevolence, but evil Cyberthergy. So that's the big reason to take it. So if you are going into Blood Slaughterers heavily, potentially there's that one massive use for it. Outside of that, I'd still be sticking with Logic of Victory, and you get an additional reaction in the shooting phase. Now that's one of the better ones to get a reaction in, unless you're going to be taking lots of, say, Thalax, in which you want to be using their jetpacks to move up and retreat away from your enemy. So there is, in the Mechanicum army, I want to use move reactions as well. But again, Logic of Victory, and maybe it's just that Logic of Victory meshes so well with the army, but I don't think a once a game reaction, advanced reaction, is worth it in a Warlord trait over something that benefits your army ongoing throughout the entire game. Next we have the Scion of Retlaxy. When a model with the Corrupted Engine unit subtype is part of the same detachment as a Warlord with this trait, loses its last wound or hull point, it's not immediately removed. Instead, resolve a Strength 5 plus D3 AP 5 hit against every model, friend or foe, within 3 plus D3 of the model's hull. Now this is essentially just an explosion that happens. Explosions can be quite good. It's going to mesh quite well with how your Corrupted Engines want to get into combat quite a lot. Being Strength 5 plus D3, I actually think is better than the Strength 8 explosion that normal Cybernetica explode with, because it means that you've got less chance of wounding your own engines, and at Strength 6 minimum and then 8 maximum, you've got just as much chance of wounding a 1 wound Marine. Yes, you won't be doubling out the Terminators and things like that, but actually the frequency in which a Terminator goes down by rolling the 1 on its armor save and then dying to the explosion is relatively low compared to when I've been playing mech and I explode and then, oh no, I've just taken a load of wounds off my Castellax blob. So it is better, this Scion of Retlaxy, of allowing you to take less damage on the explosions, but it's also giving you that explosion rule. So it can be quite fun if you want to use one of the traits. this is the best one up to now, I think is how I'll say it. I still don't think it's as good as Logic of Victory. You get an additional reaction in the shooting phase, obviously can be quite good. To utilise all these reactions, realistically, you're going to have to using Myrmidon Secateurs, Thalax, Corrupted Engines to utilise reactions to a greater degree. Otherwise, taking Magos Dominus, or even having your Archmagos with the Aether Tech from Necromunda, sorry. Having your Magos with Aether Tech, maybe even having some Tech Priest Auxilia just to get those Cyberneticas off and reacting more in your own game to utilise reactions. But at least it's in the right phase. Now finally we've got the Scion of Sarum. So Sarum obviously being the Forge World which supplies the World Eaters, and also in, say, Slaves to Darkness, the Forge World where Perturabo goes to find out about the Black Oculus. Oh no, wrong! It's where Perturabo goes to find out the location of the World Eaters Legion as they bring them back to the Drive to Terror. So this is representing that Forge World, and they're very heavily corrupted. And all of these have dealt with corrupted engines, but this one this Warlord trait meshes the corrupted engines into the army the most out of any of them, I would say. So an army that includes a Warlord with this trait may select Blood Slaughterers as troops and or fast attack in the detachment. And how I'm reading this is that the detachment can only include the Warlord as well as the Blood Slaughterers as well. And actually it's quite limiting. So editor's note just to be dropped in this Scion of Sarum bit. So I've just brought this up to my gaming group, so it's a bit of an addendum to add here. There is a second way that this Scion of Sarum can be read. I'd initially had my mind boggled, and it had been reading this so you can only select Blood Slaughterers as troops or fast attack in a detachment that includes the Warlord only. The alternate way of reading that is that if your Warlord has this trait, only this detachment can select Blood Slaughterers as troops or fast attack. Now, maybe it needs answering by Games Workshop because the structure of this sentence is boggling. If you have a definitive answer for it, leave it below. I've certainly not got one. And obviously take the next bit of what I'm going to say, because this has been edited in as an editorial note. Take the next bit with that pinch of salt that I've approached it in reading it that one way, and there is the potential for it to be read the other way. And editor's note, it shouldn't take a fucking English degree to be able to understand these rules. I do think they need to simplify these and stop trying to maybe catch all loopholes with them, because I do feel like this is where this comes from, is that they're trying to close all loopholes by using incredibly complicated ways of structuring sentences and language. Maybe it's not the reason, but it's certainly not good for the rule set, I don't think, to have it needing advanced reading techniques to break down this sentence. And that is the first time in a long time that I think I've gone back and actually edited things into guides, and it's twice in one video. So going as this is written, an army that includes a Warlord that has this trait may select Blood Slaughterers as troops and or fast attack choices in the detachment, which includes the Warlord only. So only being that the Warlord can be the only other model within that detachment. I think it's written sort of confusingly and badly. How I'm reading it there is that you can only take the Blood Slaughterers, and it's very limiting to obviously what you can take. Best used in an allied detachment, or when you're going to have a fairly hefty allied detachment yourself of, say, World Eaters Marines or Solar Auxilia, things like that. Outside of that, it's incredibly limiting. So Blood Slaughterers taken as compulsory troops gain line, so that's going to be 2 units, or 1 unit if it's an allied detachment with this as the Warlord in. And yeah, it's going to be 3 models. I do think this meshes with the Corrupted Engines the best, outside of, say, your models exploding and gaining a benefit of that. Having a once a game reaction of increasing your invulnerable save by 1, and haywire dampening. Like, if you do want that limited Corrupted Engine army, you can do that. Now, outside of those Blood Slaughterers, the same detachment doesn't include a Lord of War, so you will be able to include a Kytan Engine or a Greater Brass Scorpion in there, because that's a separate detachment as an optional detachment for a Lord of War. So you can still take that. It will be Decimators in the Corrupted Engines, and obviously the rest of the Mechanicum list that you're sort of excluded from taking. Would I choose to take that downside? Not personally, for line on just the 2 troops options. Yes, it moves Blood Slaughterers to your troops, but do you really want to take 21 Blood Slaughterers in total across your army? I'm not massively sure. But if that is what you're looking for, I think it is a successful way of running Blood Slaughterers, and it definitely meshes weirdly the best with Corrupted Engines into your army, being that your entire army will be Blood Slaughterers. In summary of all the Warlord traits, none of them, I don't think, personally, are worth taking over Logic of Victory. One of the benefits of Corrupted Engines to me is that they don't explode, though obviously if you play into it, it can be a bit of a benefit that you're exploding over your enemy. Sarum is just that bit too limiting for me, especially with the variety of mech units that we've got, especially coming out in plastics, really nice. I wouldn't want to be shoehorned into the Blood Slaughterers for 9 choices between your troops and fast attack. So, although I do think it meshes, not for me. And we'll go on to the Corrupted Engines. So the Kytan Engine first, we have Movement 14, Weapon Skill 6, Ballistic Skill 3, Strength 9, Front 13, 12, 12 for side and rear, Initiative 4, 4 attacks, 8 hull points at 420 points. And that's in the Lord of War slot, so for anyone considering Sarum, it's in that optional detachment. Now, it's a Knight and Corrupted Engine, which will mean that you just intrinsically cause Fear 1. This is the Corrupted Engine rules. Any rule that would affect a model with Corrupted Engine also affects Corrupted Engine subtypes, blah, blah, blah. You're immune to Fear, automatically pass regroup test, and cannot fail the morale, but you're already a Knight, so you're fearless. Corrupted Engines suffer instant death against force weapons. You don't suffer instant death, you instead lose D3 wounds. And you can't be joined by non-Corrupted Engines. All a bit moot points, really. You've got Malefic Aegis 5 up, which is just invulnerable saves that don't stack with another invulnerable save. It's obviously better than a Knight, it's not in a specific arc, it's all the way round. That can then be increased with the Aether Tech to 4 up, or it actually stacks to 3 up, but you can't get multiple instances of it, so it will never go past that 4 as it currently stands, as I can see it. Now, for the actual weapons on here, we've got a Cleaver of Slaughter, which is just a flat strength 10, meaning that your strength 9 only applies to your 4 Hammer of Wrath, as well as the Stomp attacks. You've got AP2, Melee, Brutal 3 on a non-Marine unit, wow, and Shred so that you're re-rolling them ones that you get on the wound roll. Now, you've got Rampage D3 and you'll pretty much always be outnumbered, so averaging 6 attacks total. At Weapon Skill 6, you're already very high, so you'll be hitting most elite units on 3s, which is one of the downsides of a lot of these Mechanicum engines and non-marine opponents on non-marine units that we see. Within that, having fear stacked with a decent number of attacks, a decent weapon skill, and then a high brutal means that you're at least as likely as, say, like a Leviathan to be able to smash into things and cause those morale checks for your opponent and then sweep your opponent. And that's something that Mechanicum units have largely suffered from, is that your weapon skill isn't high enough to account for your low number of attacks. And I'm not saying your attacks here are particularly high, but it can make up for those medium numbers of attacks, especially on a 400 point unit, and therefore trigger your fear and help you to run down your opponent. So I think it's okay with how it's set up. The movement value, obviously it's knight movement of 14. I do quite like it. Whether or not it's worth 400 points, I don't think so. Though when you start adding in your Magos with the Aether Tech, you can get it to Weapon Skill 7, which makes it very survivable, at least in combat. And add to the Initiative to make it Initiative 5, so that you're striking before anything can even rend up to your frontal armour of 13. So it does a decent amount of damage, including the stomps. The Hammer of Wrath I largely just discount because armour saves can be used against it, so not looking to that for damage. Flank speed is fairly good, but I'd likely with this be deploying on my deployment line, moving forward 14, and then be able to declare that charge within the first turn. So I'm going to actually be getting, even on a fail, at movement 14, which gives me +3 to my charge range, or +3 to my roll, sorry. So I can charge 2 inches into my opponent's deployment zone. Even if I fail that, I'm going to be going forward an average of 5 inches with that halved charge move for what I'm failing, if they are on the line and I can declare that charge. So flank speed I'm not too bothered about, and it's an okay unit. I don't think it's the greatest. I think anything with an armor value is in a bit of a tough spot nowadays. One of the things that it lacks is the nice knight household traits that limit the amount of hull points that can be done to 1 hull point. It would have been nice to see that, because it's every knight army that I've faced has used that for all of their knights and always say how necessary that is. And all I can do is sort of bow to their wisdom, and I sort of believe them when they say it, in that lots of hull points come off these explode, lots of las cannons are going through and getting those 6s and exploding you, especially when you start throwing in the fact that multi-melters only need a 5 to explode you, and they're on Gravis multi-melter dreadnoughts all the time. You've got a frontal armour of 13. It is likely that you're going to get those explosion results, and it's going to very quickly chip those hull points off. So that is one of the major downsides. On the flip side, having that Malefic Aegis of 5 up going to a 4 up when you've boosted it, it's fairly... that in itself is good. We've all had those games where, or if you've not played Heresy 1, maybe you've not, but in Heresy 1 maybe you've had those games where someone's run their Leviathan Siege Dreadnought, or it comes down in a pod and you shoot your entire army at it for a turn and they tank every single 4-up save on that Dreadnought, and you're like, oh no, I am going to get bent over by this Leviathan in my next turn. So it has the possibility of doing that. It's a bit of an outside chance, but it's there. I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. If you like the model, I know certainly the one with legs I really liked. The one on tracks I wasn't the biggest fan of, but the Kytan engine, I don't know whether it was a conversion or whether it was an actual Forge World kit, but if it floats your boat, I don't think it's the worst option in the world, and it's 400 points isn't too far out there compared to, say, like a 275 point Leviathan Dreadnought, because it's not that much more expensive, he says, knowing that a Contemptor's only like 135 points. Right, so next, let's go on to, oh, I'm going the wrong way, onto the Brass Scorpion. Now this is 440 points. Starting off with the model, this is an absolutely excellent model. The detail that's on the underside of it, even of people being like buried in the wires and like screaming faces in the wires, is just absolutely excellent. I think it's one of the best large scale models, one of the most inspired ones at least that Forge World has ever done. Why have I not got one? Why have I not got one? I should get one. And it's just, the model is excellent. I'm glad that we got rules in it. Yes, it's repeated rules across all of this section. I know some people will be expecting me to bang on about that. I'm not going to bang on about that. We've seen these rules before, and I'll give a bit of that at the end of why I'm not going to be banging on about it, because I've sort of come up with my viewpoint on that I don't mind it that much. So the actual rules for the Greater Brass Scorpion. We've got movement 10. We've got weapon skill 5. Ballistic skill 4, strength 9, 13, 13, 12, initiative 4, 3 attacks, and 8 hull points. So all basically less than the Kytan engine, other than the frontal armour and the strength. Not that the strength comes into it massively anyway. Again, we've got Knight and Corrupted Engine. You've got a Etheric Dominion Heedless Slaughter, which means that when you've got to declare a charge, if there's an enemy with an 8, you can't charge at a different unit than the one that you've shot at. So if you want to control that a little bit, you can just shoot at one that's further away. A unit composed entirely of models with this special rule adds +1 to any charge rolls and +1 to the score to see if you win the assault, and +1 to your sweeps. Not that you're going to be sweeping anything because you're a knight, actually. So again, you've got Hammer of Wrath 4, Rampage D3, which goes away to mitigate the attacks of 3. A Malefic Aegis 5. Again, the points from the Kytan engine stand on those ones. Although you've got a lesser movement, you get that +1, though arguably the Kytan engine got that, it does get that +1 and is better because in terms of movement getting up the board, because it's movement 14 more than makes up for that +1, as well as getting an additional +1 because it's in the 14 bracket of declaring assaults and charge distances. So what do we get for this extra 20 points? What you get is a turret mounted Scorpion Cannon. The Scorpion Cannon is range 30, strength 5, AP 4, assault 9, pinning and shred. So okay, I don't think it's worthwhile on a 400 point model, but let's move on to the centerline dismounted despoiler cannon. So this is range 24, strength 10, AP 3, ordnance 1, blast 3 inches, sunder, rending 5, brutal 3. So running down the lines of a demolisher cannon, fairly similar stats there, although only strength 10 rather than strength 12. It's got the brutal 3 and rends on a 5. I think it suffers from that sort of double nerf that all of these things got, like artillery pieces, artillery tanks, demolishers, both on the Russes and Vindicators. It suffered under the regime that has nerfed all of those by making them more expensive in points, as well as actually nerfing what they do from a large blast to a small blast, as well as making them AP3, which doesn't work as well in Heresy 2 because of how save bouncing works. And you can like, oh, it's AP3, I'll put this on a 2-up save. Oh, it's AP2, I'll put this on a 3-up save. So your opponent's always sort of taking, and yourself are always taking the saves that they want. And I think it leaves AP3 in this weird sort of middle ground where it's actually not that much better than AP4. So not the greatest there. We've got two hull front mounted Hellmore cannons. Now these are range template, strength 7, AP 4, assault 1 and torrent 6 inches. So not quite doubling out Marines. You are wounding them on 2s, however, pretty much regardless of who they are, even with Iron Hands -1 strength. It's okay, it still allows armor saves. That's a thing that's consistent across most of these. The majority of units are going to get an armor save in some way, shape or form for most of the time, especially when you're coming up against heavy units, and this would previously have been something that, like, oh, despoiler cannon, bam, destroy a unit of Terminators. It sort of leaves the Brass Scorpion in a place where it's paid points for a lot of shooting, but actually that shooting isn't that great, along with the other units of artillery and siege guns that I named before. The Hell Crusher claws are strength 10, AP 2, brutal 2 and sunder, so can do a little bit to tanks because of the sunder, and strength 10's fairly good. Yes, you're going to be doubling things out, but you've got less attacks than the Kytan engine, you've got less movement, you've less weapon skill, even when buffed with that Aether Tech, or the evil Cybernetica powers from the Aether Tech. You're just paling a little bit in insignificance with the Brass Scorpion to the Kytan engine. And it's a bit of a shame because this, as I said right at the start, is, I think, one of the best models they've ever done. Would I still put it on the table? Yes. Would I still recommend people to put it on the table? Yes. You're welcome, Alim, if you are watching. We both know that he's not going to be great, though. You've read these. And especially in the Legacies, we've known it since then. But I encourage you to play with it. It's a brilliant model. It's just not the greatest in rules, is it? So let's move on to the Decimator. No, let's go to the Bloodslaughter. Let's do it in order of the book rather than the order I took pictures for some stupid reason. So the Bloodslaughter, this is 110 points. I think the Bloodslaughter is actually an amazing unit. We've got movement 9, weapon skill 5, strength 6, toughness 6, 5 wounds, initiative 3, 4 attacks, leadership 9 and a 3-up save. You've got Dreadnought Corrupted Engine, so again you ignore the bit of the Corrupted Engine that means you take wounds if you fail a morale check, because you won't. You've got Etheric Dominion Heedless Slaughter, that's the one that forces you to charge. That's never going to be a problem, and you're going to get +1 to your charge move, so you're actually going to have +2 to your charge move with your movement 9, as well as the Etheric Dominion. You've got Furious Charge 1, Hit and Run, which is excellent, obviously, for repeatedly charging your foe to make use of that Furious Charge 1, as well as gaining the additional attacks. Move through cover. Your Malefic Aegis is only 6 up, and you've got 2 Slaughterer's Blades, and what the Slaughterer's Blades do is AP 3, melee rending 6+. You can have an additional 2 Blood Slaughterers for 110 points a model, and have an Impaler Harpoon instead of one of the Slaughterer's Blades. Maybe on one, maybe on one. So, what does the Impaler Harpoon do? It's range 12, strength 6, AP 3, heavy 1, Impale. Impale is a new special rule that means a unit may reroll charges when attempting to charge a unit that has suffered 1 or more hits from a weapon with the Impale special rule, caused by 1 or more models in the unit which declared the charge. This effect takes place even if no wounds are caused by the hits. If 1 or more wounds are caused, the affected unit decreases its initiative by 1 till the end of the subsequent assault phase. Essentially, just 1 in a unit is going to decrease your attacks by 1, but allow you to re-roll those failed charges. Part of the Aether Tech is going to be allowing your unit to move its initiative value towards your opponent. So I do think actually you should take one of the Impaler Harpoons. With movement 9, the Etheric Dominion adding 1 to your charge, you're going to get +2 to your charge. You move your initiative of 3 after moving 9, so that means a total of 12-inch move. That means you need a 10 minus the 2 for your charge bonuses, meaning an 8 to charge something on your opponent's line first turn with the Blood Slaughterers, which is absolutely terrifying for a unit. Yes, they might not rip through your opponent's elite units, And yes, they might be AP3, which I've said is not in the greatest spot, but motoring up the board, as well as having weapon skill 5, which is actually very rare in the Mechanicum army, something that's actually unique in terms of corrupted engines, cybernetica, automata. It's unique to the traitors in these form of corrupted engines, is a real boon, and I think you should be using them, and using them to pick on your enemies' medium units that aren't absolutely stocked full of Artificer armor or Terminator armor. I wouldn't expect them to win against anything with a 2-up save, but I think they'll have a good go for their equivalent points cost. So say 3 of them running into 300 points worth of unit. I think they'll have a good go of ripping through that unit, or even 2 of them running into 200 points of unit. I do think they'll have a good go of ripping through it. Yes, you'll get crack grenaded in return. You'll get wounded auto hit and wounded half the times, but that is just the experience of playing Mechanicum in Heresy 2, is you run into a unit with a combat specialist and you get auto hit by a crack grenade, and then you toughness 6 and you've got a 3-up save. It does bite you in the arse a little bit with that Malefic Aegis, but now at least you're in combat and safe from your opponent's return fire in their turn. Now, that I think sums up the Blood Slaughterers. They're not the most survivable. I think they're quite cheap. 5 wounds is actually pretty good for the amount of points that they are. Let's not compare them to Dreadnoughts that at 135 points, I think we all know by now, should maybe be a bit more expensive than that and a bit less survivable. But with the bonuses that they've got, I think Bloodslaughter is in a really good place as they stand for traitor engines. So finally, we go on to the Decimator for 235 points. It's comparable to Leviathan Siege Dreadnought in how it's set up. Maybe not as good, but for Mechanicum, I think actually quite a good unit and a good combat specialist for them. So we've got movement 7, weapon skill 5. Again, unlock weapon skill 5 within your traitor Mechanicum army. It's a great place to have it. You've got strength 8, toughness 7, 7 wounds, initiative 4, 5 attacks, leadership 8, 2-up save. The initiative 4 and weapon skill 5 can both be upgraded again with the Aether Tech. So if you are running lots of these corrupted engines, that's the one that you want to be going for on your Magos, or your Archmagos, sorry, so that you can boost that weapon skill to 6, so that you can boost the initiative to 5, so you can go before your opponent's normal Marines and therefore do damage to them, take hits away from coming back in on yourself with any nasty combat specialists, because that weapon skill going to 6 is going to mean that your opponent's combat specialists largely hit you on 5s, which is a great place to be. You've got Malevolent Artifice, which I skipped it on the Kytan Engines sadly, but models with this special rule may reroll all failed armor saves taken against wounds that have come from a source with lower strength value than their unmodified toughness characteristic. No effect on cover or in runs. So essentially, if someone's striking you with a crack grenade, you're going to re-roll that 2-up save. If someone's shooting you with a heavy bolter, a Volkite, Culverin, anything from those sources, you're going to get to re-roll that 2-up. If they're shooting at you with an autocannon, lascannon, missile launcher, it's not helping at all, though arguably only it stops those annoying wounds coming off your Decimator. It's not going to stop obviously the lascannon just pummeling you with wounding you on a 2 and ignoring your save. You've got Hammer of Wrath 2. Again, I'm not a massive fan of Hammer of Wrath. How it's worked ever since I've got in the game about 10 years ago, into Heresy about 10 years ago even. We've got Malefic Aegis 5-up. A good level can obviously go to 4 with Aether Tech. Obviously this Aether Tech I'm always using as the example, and it's going to be doing a lot of work if you're doing these corrupted engines. We've got move through cover, traitor only, and you have 2 Decimator siege claws with inbuilt heavy flamers. So a Decimator Siege Claw is AP2 and Brutal 3. So again, comparable to that Leviathan Siege Dreadnought. Brutal 3, just unseen in the Mechanicum range. It's not on Domitar, it's not on anything like that. I think that makes the Decimator pretty brilliant, is having Brutal 3, especially at Strength 8, so that outside of Sons of Horus, you'll be doubling Marines out with a Strength of 8. It's great. You can upgrade to have a Butcher Cannon for 10 points, which is range 48, strength 7, AP 4, heavy 3, rending 6, twin linked. I would not take that personally. Or a Soul Burner Petard for 15 points each. What that does is range 24, strength 6, AP 4, heavy 1, blast 3 inch, breaching 5 up, Fleshbane. Again, would not touch it with a barge pole. Essentially, you're just taking away decent combat weapons. It's the things that we swap out Dreadnought's Power Fists for, like multi-melters and things like that, reliably do damage on the same level, if not to the same level as the Claw, over time, where you're going to be firing at every turn that you're out of combat or where you're about to charge. Over time, does as much damage as the Claw. Both of these weapons are much worse, being AP4, with the best breaching being 5 up on the Soul Burner. It's just not reliable to do that damage. And none of them have the amount of shots that even, say, a Heavy Bolter does in terms of the Butcher Cannon. I just would not touch them. And I'm not the greatest fan of the Decimator model, sadly. It's something that actually I started out liking it and it waned over time, rather than some things like this Lord Solar Macarius model. I just love the derpiness my love of the derpiness increased over time. The Decimator, maybe I'll come back round on it. Maybe I'll get like the horseshoe shape of appreciation graph on it, but it's just not something that I'm a massive fan of at the moment. Maybe I need to get one and then my appreciation will increase. But yeah, it's something that I'm going to source my own conversions doing. I think it's a worthwhile unit. I think both this and the Blood Slaughterers, I had to look for that name then, both the Decimator and the Blood Slaughterers fitting into a Traitor Mechanicum army, having that weapon skill 5, having the ability to boost that situationally, I think are really good for Mechanicum combat capabilities. I think it's great for getting those in your army. It gives another way of playing Mechanicum, where we've been struggling, I would say, to have a combat Mechanicum army outside of, say, Myrmidon spam with axes. But they're not. It's the plasma bits of the Myrmidons that tend to do the damage into it. But yeah, I think they're good for the game. I like them. And that is the Corrupted Engines. Shall we finish off with the new Krios Venator type? Now, obviously, this is something we've already seen and covered in the Mechanicum review and rundown, which is just for the main Mechanicum forces. I'll link the first of the guides, and that will run through all 3 of the guides up above. Now, we've got, in addition to the Battle Tank and the Venator, the new edition of the Krios Irradiator. So, surely that means, because Games Workshop doesn't include now anything in these books that they're not making a model for, so surely we're going to see the Krios Irradiator. Maybe that's been leaked already, maybe that's a thing, but I don't know. This is the first thing that I'm seeing of it, and then maybe I've just missed the... If you know that it's already out, leave it below. Or if you've seen rumours about this, leave it below so that I can check them out. I want to know what a Krios Irradiator looks like. So it's movement 16 BS4, front 13, 12, 10 for the rear. HP, hull points 4. We've got a front-mounted irradiation blaster for the Irradiator, searchlights. You've got a galvanic traction drive, so reroll difficult and dangerous terrain checks. It will not die 6 up. We've got, being a fast vehicle, you can take an additional Krios battle tank for 125 points, and then you upgrade them to the Irradiator for plus 40 points on model, so it's 165 points. And you can take 2 centerline mounted Volkite Calivers, which I'm not sure I would, because they're just a bit on the expensive side for what it is. If it was Culverins, I'd definitely take it. So, what does the Irradiation Blaster do? You've got 2 modes, focused and dispersed. If it's anything like the Thalax focused and dispersed, I'm going to say we're not ever going to use one of them. So we've got focused, range 16, strength 7, AP 3, heavy 1 Fleshbane, Radphage, Radiation Beam. What the hell is that? So Radiation Beam is all models, friend or foe, within the beam area suffer a hit with the listed profile of the weapon, excluding flyers. Units with any models in the beam receive hits numbered to the models caught. If it hits a terrain piece, building, model with the vehicle type, or any model with 6 or more starting wounds, the attack is blocked and the line goes no further. However, that model suffers D3 hits rather than just the usual 1. And essentially, the beam is draw an imaginary line 1 millimeter wide and vaporize it up the field. Now, it's okay. It's hard to put a number or like a yes or no on whether this focused beam is worth it or not. It depends how packed your table is. It depends how particular your opponent is spacing out their units, or focused your opponent is spacing out their units. It depends, does your opponent see it coming and not line up their models? They could get a load of hits. It also could not. So it's very hard. So looking at the stats, range 16 is quite short. It's quite short, especially for Marines moving forward 7 and then crack grenading your rear with a charge of average 7. So they're only going to need to get 2 inches over average to get into your tank and then crack grenade you to death. So yes, it's quite short. You got to wound on 2s because you've got Fleshbane. And AP 3, as I said in the Brass Scorpion, Kytan Engine, Blood Slaughterers bit, AP 3 is in a bit of a weird place, I would say. So it can be great if you've already sniped your opponent's Artificer Armor Sergeant. That can be great if you have a Thanatar Calyx that's got precision shots from having Paragon of Metal, or you've got a Castellax with a Darkfire Lance and you snipe out your opponent's Sergeant with that precision shots. It can be good because you've just then eliminate a squad because of the AP 3. I don't know whether that is then better than a squad of Myrmidon Destructors with Irradiation Engines or IRAD Cleansers, the AP 3 Torrent Flamers, that sort of pair well nicely with that sniper bot. Because this, obviously, it just depends on how much you're catching with that beam. I'm not massively against it, but we just have to see in-game how well it goes. Dispersed mode is range of Hellstorm template. Where the hell is everyone getting the Hellstorm templates at the moment? I cannot find for the life of me a 7-inch, 9-inch blast and a Hellstorm template. I've just no idea where to go for them. But he's strength 2, AP 5, heavy 1, Fleshbane, Radphage. Radphage I find to be a bit of a bookkeeping nightmare. Fleshbane, good if you can catch a load in the dispersed template. The Hellstorm template itself is 16 inches long, so you're going to be just as much in the danger zone or far away as the focused beam that you're going to be firing. So both of the modes are danger close for you. I suppose danger close doesn't mean that, but danger is close to you. Do I think it's that effective? It's allowing armor saves. It maybe gets to a point where I'm starting to think that the risk reward of getting that close isn't that great here. If it was, say, AP4, I'd say it could have a definite usage against Solar, which I think Games Workshop is expecting to crop up a lot more now. But being that Militia is a legacy list and we hardly ever see any Militia at events, I'm usually the guy playing Militia. Or if you're out there playing Militia, you are a champion. But Dispersed, I don't know whether it's got that much of a place. So with them relying on Focused to get that AP3, and then it's just down to the beam. So it's very hard to give like a definitive thing for this new Krios variant. I'm interested to see what it looks like. I'm interested to use it. I'm undecided of whether I think it's good or not. And I'm sorry that I can't end that on a more definitive note, but hopefully it's made you just as confused as me about this unit. If you've got an opinion on it, or you've had more experience using these short range, very small beams, let me know. Because I've only ever played with glaive beams, which are like a tape measure width, and just evaporate units at AP2D flag. And with that, cheers for watching, and we'll catch you in a bit. See ya.